I got to admit that until recently, I was thinking about AI like totally wrong. Everybody's out there talking about how AI is going to automate tasks, it's going to make us more efficient, and we're all really like impressed and concerned with the technology tools that are out there. But the real shift is happening at a societal level and at a really strategic level inside of companies. And what's happening is it's bringing transparency, accountability, and decision making much more into focus. My guest today, and the person that I learned all this from, is Mark Stouse. He is the CEO of ProofAnalytics. And what Mark does today is breaks down how AI is forcing companies to rethink customer value, why risk management is now such a big part of our jobs, and what we need to do as account managers to stay ahead. Mainly, this means that we can't rely on the same old playbook. We have to start thinking about the real drivers of retention, what really reduces risk both for our customers and our companies, how we share proof that we're delivering value to clients. And what AI is doing is it's forcing companies to answer all these questions with real data, not just relationships or gut instincts. If you're responsible for customer growth and retention, this episode is likely going to change the way you think about your work. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Mark Stouse. If you're an account manager, you already know this. You're the one keeping the business running. You own the client relationships, drive the revenue, and solve the tough problems for your customers. But here's the challenge. Most companies don't give account managers the training or recognition they deserve. That's what you'll get here on the Account Management Secrets podcast. I'm Alex Raymond, and after working with thousands of account managers, I know what separates the best from the rest. In this show, we cover exactly what you need to succeed, handling tough client conversations, driving renewals and upsells with confidence, and proving your value every single day. There's no fluff, no outdated sales tactics, just real practical strategies you can use right now to grow your accounts and build a successful career. If that sounds like what you've been looking for, hit subscribe and let's get into it. Hey, Mark, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining on Account Management Secrets.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Now, you're the CEO of ProofAnalytics, really cool company in the AI space. And you are someone who's got an incredible voice and points of view that I see coming across on LinkedIn. That's how I had found you initially connected. You are constantly writing about the changes that artificial intelligence is bringing and really how this is going to make lots of things that we take for granted in business differently. I know that you've got some context to share with us, and I would love for our listeners just to understand what are the big forces that are going on out there right now around AI. How can we start to get our heads wrapped around the bigger picture here, as opposed to just jumping into the details of like which chat version is better and this, that, and the other. Like, give us more of the big picture of what's happening right now to kick off, Mark.
AI is without a doubt a super technology. A super technology is defined in short, by containing both its strengths and its weaknesses to an unprecedented degree. Whatever your reaction is, right, is one of surprise. So right here, right now, though, what is happening is that it is bringing unprecedented levels of transparency and accountability to every part of the enterprise, to a degree that none of us, to be perfectly candid about it, right, are fully prepared for. As you and I were talking about before we got started, right, I mean, it is essentially shrinking the gray zone of ambiguity, right? This is the area in which all of us have kind of bobbed and weaved our whole professional lives, right? And that space is getting smaller and smaller, like right now. And like a year from now, it'll be dramatically smaller. And 2 years from now, be a very small little place in which we can dance. Okay. So there's that absolute certainty. And you can like it, you cannot like it. Honestly, like a lot of what I'm about to say, it doesn't matter. Your personal feelings about it, my personal feelings about it, are irrelevant. So then, and this is also a mark in history, right? It's kind of something that usually kind of goes with the whole idea of a super technology and its advent, right? So not apropos in any way, shape, or form with AI, but clearly doing this with it, was a judgment in January of 2023 by the Delaware Chancery Court that, keeping it simple, broadened fiduciary duty dramatically from where it had traditionally resided, board level CEO, CFO, to all officers in a company. So what that means in many companies, not all companies, is that if you're a functional leader, you're an officer. Chief marketing officer, chief revenue officer. If you've got officer in your title, you are an officer. You can still not have officer in your title and be a designated officer, right? Plus derivative duty to your direct reports.
And fiduciary duty, just to clarify, this means part of my job is to look out for the resources of the company, and specifically the resources that investors have put into the company. Is that right?
Yeah, and to deal proactively with risk to shareholder value. There is a case that just got filed yesterday in California that is shareholders suing the CIO, the CDO, the chief data officer, and the CRO for exactly this, for CRM data risk, right? And their failure to deal with it. And we've all heard about people, process, technology, that triangle, right? That is essentially what that is. It's the convergence of that with regard to risk. So the CIO is being essentially included in this because he has authority over and can mitigate the risks associated with the infrastructure. So that includes the CRM itself. It also includes the CDO, so that's data integrity. And then you've got the CRO, which is more like the people part of the people process technology, who is in there because they can provably show that this person did not enforce the rules with their teams. And all of a sudden, in this particular case, for the first time, this engineering of sales data is being called out as fraud. And so it's a big deal, right?
That's a very big deal.
And they've got them, right? Because the fraud detection software that has been used in credit card companies and Fiserv in general for quite a while now, this is machine learning pattern match software. They stuck it into the CRM in question, and it revealed that like close to half the data was totally manufactured.
So the pipeline was non-existent or something like that.
Or they were like, let's say that there was a legitimate opportunity that happened on October the 1st, but the salesperson knew that if they waited, and they had pretty high confidence that they were going to close before the end of the year, and if they waited later to declare the opportunity, and thus the system showed incredible sales velocity on this deal, that they would get a spiff. So they'd make more money in their commissions, right? That's stealing. That's what that is. So it's taken a couple of years for this all to kind of work through the system and for people to become aware of it. And not very many officers are yet aware of it. Their companies have not done a very good job for the most part in educating them. So there's that. There's those two things. AI, the legal framework has changed. The third one is volatility in the marketplace, huge amounts of additional risk on many, many vectors, not just macroeconomic, but like war and peace and, all kinds of stuff, right? And so when you see these three things working and achieving a nexus of effect, that's pretty steep stuff, right? And no one is going to be able to say, you know what, I'm opting out. I'm not gonna worry about those three things, right? That's just not happening.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the context on all this, right? And it's one of the reasons why individually and collectively, we're looking at kind of a 52 card pickup scenario over the next, say, 2 to 3 years.
So what's happening here is there's some really big forces that are, outside of anyone's control, or certainly not within our choosing, and these things are happening. So we've got way more visibility into our data, the information. You were talking about accountability there as well. So like the transparency to an unprecedented degree, and the accountability through part of what you were talking about here, which was that Delaware court case of saying, well, hey, what did you do about it? And what's the implication of this? Married with volatility, interest rates, macro, political, global issues, aging workforce, all the many, many things that we know are big problems today. And so if you are running a company, you're running a go-to-market team, you're running a post-sales team, you're trying to figure all this stuff out, there's just a number of things that are just happening. And our job now is to figure out, okay, what's the consequence? What to do about this? How can I start to get my head around these changes?
Yeah, I mean, how do you surf the wave, right? You don't control the wave. If you're like me anyway, you are going to wipe out some percentage of the time, right? But your goal is not to wipe out, right? And so that is the it's kind of where we are, right? And the waves are getting bigger and more powerful, right? It's kind of like analogous. A lot of these forces are analogous to climate change in that sense, right? Is because of other things, the stuff that we have to encounter and deal with in our work life, let's just leave it there, okay, is it's just not anything that I think anybody, even say 5 or 10 years ago, would have reasonably predicted, right? And so there's just a lot of change.
So how do corporate leaders start to get their head around this? If we talk about the work life, what are the discussions that are happening? What are the consideration points? What are the and obviously there's going to be a tremendous number of opportunities that present themselves here, and a huge number of risks and negative changes. So how are people starting to triage through this?
Well, I think that there was actually a lot, but some big ones would be, for the first time in several hundred years minimum, right? The so-called accounting mindset is being questioned. It's not that it's not, important to have good books and all that kind of stuff, right? But accountants and accounting focuses on the past. And if past is not prologue, okay, then you've got a little bit of a problem. And so what has happened historically, right, is that you had maybe, let's just say you had 20 years worth of accounting data, right? And so the assumption is that you could extrapolate off the back of that into the future and get reasonably close, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's just not the case. And anybody who went through COVID saw that was another 52 card pickup scenario, right? Went through 3 years ago the spike in interest rates, the disappearance of fast, easy, cheap money, right? All that kind of stuff. Another major inflection, right? So that is that's one thing that's being questioned. At the same time, everybody is waking up to the fact that causal analytics is really mathematically and scientifically the only way to understand a lot of this, because
as opposed to traditional predictive analytics.
Well, I guess really depends on what you mean by traditional predictive analytics, right? So the most traditional would be multivariable regression, which is actually the kind of the fundamental underpinning of causal analytics, now causal AI, right? This is all three are a hinge on understanding what's called causal inference. In other words, why the hell did this happen the way that it did, and what can we learn from it, and how can we forecast causally into the future and kind of operate a GPS of sorts for our business, right? That's really what it comes down to. The only thing that Gen AI tools, machine learning tools, can do in this regard is to figure out the pattern in all the data. And based on that pattern, they can predict the next fill in the blank in that pattern. What business teams mean by predictive is a forecast.
I'm going to know what comes next. I'm going to see the future. It's going to tell me where the slope of the line is going.
Yeah, it's not just the next step or the next fill in the blank. It's like a whole thing beyond that, right? And also they want it multivariable. They want to understand this network of causes and effects that all kind of come together to produce this outcome. And what are the relative strengths of the different factors involved? And then how do, so basically individual contribution to an outcome, and then synergistic contribution to an outcome, net of time lag, which is the amount of time that it takes for anything to start having an effect, right? And net of external headwinds and tailwinds, things you don't control, which are usually about 2/3 of the model, because it's about 2/3 of life, right?
Right.
So that's starting to really come into major play, further reinforced by the whole fiduciary duty risk management thing, right? So it's not just, they're not just doing it because, who wouldn't want to do it, kind of almost like who wouldn't want to be better, make better decisions, all that kind of stuff, right? But they've also got a gun pointed at their head legally, right? And so that's what's going on. There are a lot of parts of this equation. Customer success is one, brand and reputation are others, things like this, that leaders have tended to not fully appreciate, mainly because they were very difficult to prove impact on.
Okay, say more.
All right. So if you don't so both of these, brand and reputation, and then customer success, okay? These are both very time lagged investments.
Yeah.
Right? You have to do them a long time before they have a discernible impact. And that's whether, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about one customer or all customers, your ICP, right? It doesn't matter, right? It's lagged. And if you don't have causal analytics, even in very basic form, you don't know what the lag is. So you don't know where in the calendar to look for the value to start being created. So then everybody kind of says, well, shit, we've been doing all this stuff now for a couple of years and can't really see anything in particular. So must be kind of a nice to have, not a must
right.
have.
Or they say, I don't know which one of these activities is most valuable, so I'm just going to do all of them. Right. And I wind up taking on way too much work and doing way too much stuff and not being clear what part's moving the needle.
That's right. I mean, you get into the peanut butter strategy, right? Where you basically say, to avoid risking too much on any one thing, we're just going to really spread this very thin across everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is, and people will say, well, I run a 401k of go-to-market, right? Well, that is actually an accurate analogy. The problem is what works on a 20 to 30 year investment cycle doesn't exactly work in a quarterly cycle, or even if you've got a really broad-minded C-suite that thinks in years, it still doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
And to what you were saying earlier, this is impactful. This is meaningful because all of a sudden there's more data, there's more information. I'm able to make causal links that I was previously not able to make. So everybody can suddenly see more. They can see what's going on, what's happening. And that's behind what you said earlier, shrinking the gray zone, meaning where a lot of management, quote unquote, management operates today is that gray zone. It is piecing together disparate pieces of information. It is kind of getting from A to B with a little bit of spit and duct tape, type of thing. And all that is going away.
Like most companies, I think it's still very much use BI dashboards to try and manage a lot of this. That's just a beautiful rendering of past data. It tells you nothing about what's happening now, or certainly not in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's, to be perfectly brutally honest, it's meaningless.
It's a snapshot in time is what it is.
And what BI invites you to do, not intentionally, but just the way it works with human nature, is it invites you to see consequences in the BI dashboard data that actually don't exist except in your mind. Right? And that's a big problem. So let's take customer success. So customer success, the most successful ones that I've ever been a part of were set up very simply and straightforwardly vis-a-vis the sales team. Sales team pursued net new logos, got commissioned on year one deals, and had absolutely nothing to do with renewals.
Yep.
They were proverbially the hunters. Customer success was commissioned entirely on renewals at exactly the same percentage as the sales guys were on year one.
Okay.
Right. And that is without, you can go further with Causal AI on this, but that is a classic A/B test. Okay. That's either they renewed or they didn't renew. It's kind of like they bought or they didn't buy. So things like, this is actually kind of complex a little bit. So I'm just going to ask everybody's forgiveness for that. And I'm going to do my best to kind of guide you through this. Okay. So there are two different kinds of functions inside of business A. One creates value on a linear basis. What I mean by that is costs track outcomes on a fairly linear basis. A great example of this would be if I go to my CRO and say, guess what? We're doubling your target for this year. The very next conversation that I'm probably going to have is he's going to want to double the size of the sales team. Right? Because the target is divided by a certain number of people based on a known burden, right? And it's just simple math.
Yeah. Or similarly, we've got ratios of accounts to account managers and how big is your portfolio. And as the total universe of customers grows, then we sort of expect a general parallel line in terms of cost. So there's that one standard. And what's the other?
The other one is nonlinear multipliers. So marketing is an example of this. So I would, if I doubled the quota, the target for this year, I would have to have that CRO conversation, but I would not have to have a conversation like that with the CMO. You double the target, you do not double the marketing. Okay. And the reason for that is that marketing is all about leverage. So the value of customer success in all this is that customer success is not just a renewal engine. It's an early warning system.
Yes.
It is giving you feedback to both product and sales and marketing and everybody else. Hello, got a problem, right? We may not have actually seen this turn into a renewal problem, but like we're getting the same reports from a whole bunch of customers that this product has problems.
Yep.
So, you don't have to be like a super smart person to figure out that if they've got 6 months left in their contract, they're already wondering what they're going to do about that, and they're probably not going to renew. So in that sense, this is sort of like one of the interesting aspects of some functions like customer success, which, and it's not unique to customer success, but it's a very short list. They're both linear value creators, and in other areas of the business, they are multipliers. And the way they are multipliers in this situation is they are giving you such early warning that they are giving you a lot more time than you would ordinarily have if they didn't exist in your company, that more time than you would have to fix it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, so here's the way this kind of comes together with AI.
So in the age of AI, we are more interested in investing in customer success, or at least the mentality of customer success, because it gives us more leverage.
Yeah, I'll put it this way.
Yeah.
Customer success has everything at its disposal that it needs to prove its value today using AI. If you are leading a customer success team and basically your team gets liquidated, say, a year or two from now, okay, it didn't have to be that way. And you can take that to the bank, right? You did not do your job in terms of proving the value, using the available tools to prove the value. That you can just, again, take it to the bank. So it's really that the onus for this is on the functions. And that's one of the reasons why Delaware took the position that it took with fiduciary duty. It decided that leaving fiduciary duty exclusively with the board, the CEO and the CFO, was too remote from the daily realities, the operational realities of the business, to be relevant.
Because they're just not close enough to the day-to-day.
Not close enough at all. In fact, one of the interesting things about the McDonald's case, which is probably the only part of the case that is disputed, okay, depending on your perspective, is that they actually let the board members off the hook on this one and totally went after the officer.
Totally went after management. Yeah.
Yeah. In this case, with the case of McDonald's, it was the CHRO, head of HR.
So if I'm an account management leader, customer success leader, post-sales leader, and I'm listening to this podcast, I'm suddenly aware of a much bigger perspective on the history of this super technology that you were talking about. How do I go back and start a conversation with my company about, here's what's going on? How do I start to explore options? how do we motivate a broader discussion about this? Because today everyone's trapped in this idea of like, oh, should I be using Claude or Perplexity or ChatGPT, or like, how do I get Salesforce to talk better to my marketing tool, and like, stuff like that, really, really tactical stuff. What you're saying is there's a paradigm shift happening, and if we're not aware of it, we're all going to get knocked out, just washed out to sea. And so let's say I am aware of this and I'm thinking, how can this apply to my post-sales function, account management, retention, growth, churn minimization, et cetera? How do I go find resources? How do I start to have a broader conversation about this?
I think that's key. If you're defining the change as essentially rooted in tools, okay, this is not good. Okay. So best way in by far is to talk about what they're so concerned about up on the 21st floor or whatever the C-suite floor is in your company, right? And that's risk. And risk is defined both ways. There's mitigation of downside risk, which I think everybody gets, right? This is the loss of something that shouldn't have happened, right? There's also the mitigation of upside risk, which is generally thought of as the inability / failure to grab onto an opportunity and ride it upwards to the benefit of the shareholders. So if you kind of say, look, I've done so let's say that you are, I'm going to raise this up a little bit. Let's say you're a CMO, right? And you've got customer success reporting into you. You got a bunch of different things reporting into you. And you sit down with all your direct reports and you say, guys, we don't need to just assess our capabilities and capacities. We need to assess risk in our function. So really easy to define this. If all of a sudden we're sued and we're sitting there and getting asked questions from the lawyer, and the questions are like, so it's widely accepted that causal AI, use of causal AI is a necessary, arguably the only way to assess causal effect in what you're doing, and thus the value of what you're spending, and whether or not you're wasting a lot of shareholder money, and whether or not you're adequately prepared to do cool stuff when you need to. Are you using causal AI? Well, no, we're not.
Right. It's a baseline. It's like, do you have a CRM? Do you have like some of the basics?
Right. CRM data quality. Do you know your CRM data quality? Well, I think it's probably pretty bad. How long have you thought it was pretty bad? Well, as long as I've been here, it's probably 3 years or so. And have you ever assessed it and filed a report upstairs with the general counsel and the CFO? Well, no. Okay. There you go again. Right.
Yeah. So we use the framing of risk to get the attention of the top.
Right. And so if you've just joined a company and they just liquidated their customer success team, as an example, you need to say, hey, as part of the larger onboarding risk assessment within our function, right, we have just lost our early warning system on customer sat, and thus renewals. And we all know that sales guys are mainly focused on the new logo sales, right? And they just they're triggered in the system. Hey, you have a renewal, you got to go handle it kind of thing, right? But it's not their thing. And so they're definitely not going to also be working with the customer throughout the year and hearing directly from the customer about how, happy they are. Okay. So when they get triggered on the renewal and they contact the customer, if the customer is unhappy, that is probably going to be the first time we know about it. And we generally trigger renewals 60 days ahead of expiration. Okay. So not much time to do anything about
No
it.
time. There's no time to do anything in that case.
Right.
Almost. Yeah.
And so here's the critical thing. This is what ultimately, very simple, okay, but it makes the cheese really binding, as my dad used to say. If you issue a risk assessment on something like that and you send it by email, okay, to the CFO and the general counsel, and they tell you, don't worry about it, or we're not going to pay for that, or we're not going to do that, or whatever, guess what? The fiduciary duty risk just got transferred.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So correctly assessing risk in your organization, reporting it accurately, saying exactly what you believe needs to be done and what it will cost to do it, and what the delivery time of mitigating that risk, whatever it is, 6 months, 2 years, whatever, right? If you do that, okay, and then later you're kind of called on the carpet, that is your get out of jail free card. I mean,
Yeah.
not like,
Well, I'll say that this framing around risk is so helpful. And one of the things that I say about account managers is that at the end of the day, they have 3 jobs: keep the customers, grow the customers, and no surprises. So no surprises is your equivalent of the early warning system. And everyone complicates it, think they've got to do a million other things and just add more activity to their calendars. But that's really what it comes down to. But in your framing, and I think this is just really important for people to get their heads around, especially with the big AI discussions that are happening out there, is if I'm a leader, I've got to look at this to say risk. And risk has there's 2 perspectives to risk. One is, where do I have risk in my forecast? So my portfolio, my customer, is the renewal happening? Is the upsell happening or not happening? And obviously I'm going to put some type of risk metric on that. The other thing that I need to think about is, what is the enterprise risk? So what's the company's risk here if we don't have the right visibility, the right governance, the right decision-making process, the right accountabilities? And what role does my team and I play in that internal risk mitigation? And that is something, I do not know a lot of post-sales leaders or even all that many CROs who are starting to think in that way and to use that kind of language. And so if we want to really get to the transformative impact of the super technology, we need to be thinking like that. That's a really helpful approach for us to change the conversation to get to where we're all trying to go.
Totally. And I would add just one more thing about this.
Yeah.
And not limited to customer success. It's pretty much true for every part of the company, right? If you are not actively seeking to be more T-shaped, that's an HR phrase, right? In your perspective about whatever it is you do, right? Then you're going to have a big problem in the age of AI. And if you are really T-shaped, you are going to flourish in the age of AI. So
Tell us what you mean by T-shaped.
Yeah. So basically, the vertical part of the T is whatever it is that you're a specialist in. The horizontal bar of the T is contextual information. This is financial acumen, business acumen, the understanding of how business makes its money, more specifically, how your business makes its money. Some businesses, revenue and growth is one division. Profitability is essentially generated by a different division, right? So if you don't understand that, it's really hard for you to have the right perspective on what you do. T-shaped is adding leverage. Now, the cool part is with AI, what Gen AI really replaces is historically your ability to kind of be Gen AI-like, okay, inverting the relationships, okay, was how much knowledge did you have in your brain?
Yeah.
Knowledge on board, right? And the ability to kind of polymathically connect it. That's what Gen AI does for you today. So in a sense, everyone is kind of getting an equal start. Except it's not equal really, because you still have to make use of the tool well. And so like one of the things that I ask when I talk to people on the customer side, as well as hiring people and stuff like that, is tell me how you use AI. Just tell me stories. That's all I need is just stories, right? If you're using it to kind of like almost like just a simple replacement for Google search, that's going to kind of be pretty passe pretty soon. It is totally blowing away traditional search, by the way. I mean, just, and like next week, we're launching a new website for ProofAnalytics.
Okay.
It is an LLM driven site. So while it has some remnants of, let's call it a traditional website approach, okay, the cornerstone is essentially like a chat GPT type question window. And you can ask anything you want to about causal analytics, causal AI, proof, use cases. You can frame it in the perspective of a particular role. You can do whatever you want to, pretty much, right? If you say, what kind of fishing rod should I use for trout? It's going to say, hey, that's not what this is, right?
Right. Ask somebody else.
Ask someone else, right? But if you're asking the appropriate questions for the subject matter on the site, right, it's going to give you great answers. That's the future. That's where it's all going.
So a lot to consider here. And, I really appreciate the framing around the big trends, because this makes our audience just smarter and more conversational on these important topics. I also think the idea of approaching this from a risk mindset that says, what do we do if we know that there's going to be more transparency and more accountability throughout the entire corporation? What risk does that allow us to mitigate? What new risks appear as a result? So I think this framing is helpful for people. Mark Stouse, I just want to say thank you for the outside-in approach to AI, to helping us to rethink this and have a bit of a more clarity on what's coming down the pike in the future.
No, it's my pleasure.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Really appreciate the conversation.